Hello and welcome to the eighth episode of the KurosawaCast. My name is Rob, and joining me as ever is my good friend Craig. Hello, Craig.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Basically, if you're new to the show, Craig is a film teacher and a filmmaker, new to the films of Akira Kurosawa. And I am I feel like diehard Kurosawa fan sounds too extreme, but I'm someone who has seen and appreciated. Yeah, I'm an aficionado of Akira Kurosawa. I've seen all of his 30 films at least once, many of them many more times than that. And this time around, we've come to his what is it? His 13th film potentially. I should have looked that up before we started, but we've come to The Idiot, his 1951 film, the first film he made following Rashomon, where he won, if you'll recall from last time, many prestigious international prizes, most famously the Golden Lion at Venice Film Festival, that kind of catapulted Japanese cinema in the 50s into the sort of Western critical sort of mindset or awareness. This is fair to say, it certainly was for him at the time, a bit of a misfire coming off the back of Rashomon. I mentioned last time around because it was kind of the end of his autobiography. His biography cuts off after talking about Rashomon, but he does mention that The Idiot was very poorly received, was famously within sort of these circles cut down a lot. It was originally I keep seeing different figures, like it was 6 hours or it's 4 hours. It used to be, I think the original cut was at least 4.5 to 5 hours long, and then that was only shown once at a premiere. And then Shochiko, who the studio that he worked with on this film, they cut it to shreds, basically, and they cut it to shreds without any of his input. They asked him what cuts he'd want to make to the film. He suggested they cut it lengthwise down the film, like facetiously. And so he didn't play any part in the editing. And I think that really shows, and I think that really harms the first sort of half, certainly, of the movie as well. But anyway, one more note I'll make about it is that, like I say, made this for Shochiko. This is his last film during this sort of weird period, because most of his career, like, he's most strongly associated with making films for Toho. And this is the last of those films where he's kind of in exile from Toho. And then we'll see when he goes to Ikiru next, he's back at Toho for the next, 15 or so years. So anyway, so maybe we should, just to save you from hearing my voice, Craig, maybe you could give the audience, the listener, a little window into what exactly this film is.
Yeah, so the Idiot. I mean, obviously based on the Dostoevsky book, which I've not read, and was
me neither.
put me at I felt like put me at a severe disadvantage in following this film. But you have Kinji Kameda, who is the titular idiot. It's kind of played by. Let me just try and get this right. Masayuki Mori.
Yeah, the boring guy from Rashomon.
Basically. The boring guy from Rashomon.
He's so boring, in fact, as an actor, that he's actually been in several previous Kurosawa. I saw on Letterboxd, grays out the ones you've seen.
Yeah.
He was actually in, I think, No Regrets for Our Youth and Sagata Shiro 2. And we just completely, obviously, didn't recognize him. So anyway, carry on.
Yeah, so he's kind of in this state of PTSD after almost being killed by firing squad as a war criminal, and sort of suffering from epileptic seizures. That's kind of, people call him an idiot, but he's not necessarily he's kind of lost all his filter, and he has this kind of childlike honesty that and this inability to pick up on social cues. So people kind of relentlessly mock him. But basically, he's just this really good-hearted fella who kind of speaks really openly and honestly at all times, no matter what the cost. And he goes to stay with some relatives to sort out a farm or some sort of land, not really realizing that his relatives are trying to take advantage of him. And he meets. I can't remember who he meets first. Does he meet Akuma, or does he meet oh god, I can't even remember the other guy's name. It's very difficult. Basically, he meets a bunch of people who have their own lives going on, and they're all trying to sort of there's relationship dramas happening all over the place, basically, and he kind of finds himself falling into all of this. And in particular, there is a young lady called Takao Nasu, who is the object of affection for
everyone.
Everyone, but particularly Denkichi Akama, played by Toshiro Mifune.
Yeah.
And he kind of sort of throws everything into turmoil, really, as people kind of try to sort of backstab and further their own interests. He kind of asks these really kind of, he's constantly asking these really kind of damning but kind of naive questions, a bit like Louis Theroux. And in social situations, people kind of mock him and put him down to sort of try and deflect from that. But whenever he gets into a one-on-one situation, everyone kind of realizes their own like rotten, dark soul and kind of see him as this kind of I don't know. They kind of one-to-one. Everyone's very kind of honest and open and kind of like being around him because they feel like they make them a better person, or they can see their own faults, and it just sort of bounces around there from character to character as he kind of inserts himself into these situations, and these awful people realize they're awful and latch onto him to try and make themselves feel less awful about themselves. Is that a fair analysis?
Yeah, that's basically it. It's not high plot as films go. It's basically it is more about exploring how this kind of guileless, kind of naive but kind of pure nice guy, how he makes the other characters feel and how he's treated and all of that, rather than there actually being some sort of, there isn't something he's got to accomplish by Act 3 or anything. It's fairly character based. The version I watched, you watched it on the Criterion channel, I believe, but I watched I watched a Eureka Masters of Cinema DVD I had from years ago. I don't know what the sound quality was like on the Criterion channel one, but the sound was awful on the master on this Eureka DVD, like popping in and out, like varied, like coming at different volumes, like it was really bad. So I didn't know if that was the state the film's in or whether it was just that DVD.
I didn't notice anything on the Criterion channel.
Okay, cool. So basically, the version I had on Eureka Master Cinema was it had a really nice introduction from Alex Cox. Anyone who's got any of the kind of BFI Kurosawa DVDs or any of those things, a lot of them have intros from Alex Cox on them, and he always he's got a really nice speaking voice in Alex Cox, a really nice manner, and he just sort of introduced it in a really nice way. But he was talking about, he draws attention to the fact with this film that the second half seems to have been left more intact to Kurosawa's vision than the first half. And he highlights, and I think it's very true, kind of, it just crystallized it for me watching it this time, like, oh yeah, shit. The fact that there are so many scenes in this film where there will be, Kurosawa uses wipes, but he's quite sparing with wipes, and he uses wipes for
this is Wipe City.
This is Wipe City, and there'll be wipes just to hurry people through scenes. Like, he talks specifically about a scene where Setsuko Hara, the great Ozu actress, most famously, who's in this and No Regrets for Our Youth. She's the woman who's doing the farming in the second half of No Regrets for Our Youth. There's a scene where she walks across a room, like during a banquet or a party, and it wipes like 3 times, just covering her going down the room. There's other scenes where people are like walking towards the camera through a park, and it wipes so they get closer. You can feel like the studio are kind of fast forwarding the film because they're finding it boring. Like, that's kind of how the wipes feel in the way they're done in this.
I mean, I can empathize. There's also some really kind of clunky stuff that thankfully doesn't persist through the whole film, but like right in the early stages, there's like scenes where he's meeting people on a train, and then it will just cut, and then you'll get this big kind of text block and then voiceover.
It's
and it explains what people have been doing and their backstory. To understand this, you need to know this. It's like It's like the intertitles you get on one of the Sanshiro Sagata films where they've lost lots of the first footage. There are some like silent films where suddenly it will be like then, and then loads of plot events because they've lost a scene
It's like that, but it's just because they just went, no, this is so slow and so boring, we've got to get rid of it. There was a time it's so weird because like usually, and I think you'll probably feel the same way as this, I think most film fans do, usually if there's some butchered version of a great director's film, you feel sympathy for the director. Usually, if there's this missing footage from this film, you go, oh, Magnificent Ambersons, what would it be like if we had Wells's original ending, right? And all of that kind of thing. You always kind of think that as like a lover of film, like you'd love to see it. And there is that part of me as a Kurosawa fan that wishes the 5-hour ever version of this film existed so I could see his vision. But it's very easy to sympathize with the studio because the film, even in its current state, is very boring and extremely long.
I mean, we've already hinted at it, and like the problem with the film is, I mean, the main problem with the film is, and it's completely like it's a completely fatal flaw, and that problem is Masayuki Mori in the lead role. He's just a charisma vacuum. Like, and for a film that all hinges on the performance of this character that has to be in every scene, no, he's just it's a really dull, boring performance.
It is. And it's interesting as well. It's kind of clashes with the fact that like Toshiro Mifune in particular got terrible reviews for this film. And in fact, in the Donald Ritchie book that I always reference, he's kind of the main Western critic, sort of most revered in his knowledge of Kurosawa. Donald Ritchie really slams his performance as well and talks about how this is like a rare example of a really bad Toshiro Mifune performance. And the thing I'll give Toshiro Mifune on this is, yes, his performance is hammy as hell. He's chewing the scenery, but it's sort of like Alan Rickman in Robin Hood, you know, like he's like, it's the sort of performance where, because the film is so inert and so lifeless, when he turns up and he's just shouting and pulling faces, it kind of suddenly the film is imbued with a little bit of life. I feel very similarly with Setsuko Hara's character, because again, like Donald Ritchie really hates Setsuko Hara's character in this role, says that what she does is too over the top and doesn't fit in and is a betrayal of the character in the novel and all this bollocks. But whenever Setsuko Hara's on the screen, I'm magnetically drawn to watching her facial reaction. She gives great like fuck you face during this film, has all these intense close-ups. She's so moody. She's got such an amazing look in the film. She's like always in a cape and a beret, and like she's so wonderful to watch. But then when she's not in the film, when Mifune's not in the film, it's dead.
Yeah, I mean that's the first time the film actually became like became vaguely interesting. Was her birthday party scene about 45 minutes in, where she's supposed to be having this birthday party and everybody's there, despite the fact that they're all kind of badmouth her behind her back and say she's a fallen woman and all this kind of stuff. But everyone's at her birthday party, and she's kind of doing this really performative thing where she's kind of having this kind of grabbing hold of Kamada by the hand and dragging him round and sitting down, having these really intense conversations with him eye to eye, sort of staring at each other, kind of, and him telling her that she's not that she's pure and that she's there's goodness in her and all this kind of stuff, and she's kind of falling in love with him because of the way that he makes her feel about herself. And it's like, oh no, this is good, this is interesting, there's some stuff going on, but it's kind of like she's reacting to a blank slate. But it gets engaging, and it's engaging for about 10-15 minutes until the scene ends, and then Mifune turns up as well, and he kind of bowls in with this huge jacket and big shoulders and this entourage, and he's, like you say, he's shouting, and you don't really know what he's about. He says he's really rich, but like
the best thing about his character in this film, and I don't know, it must come from the novel. Like one of the things Donald Ritchie says about this version, because he has read the book, is he talks about the fact that the social commentary is all missing, which I could kind of guess because there isn't really social commentary, and I sort of assume that Dostoevsky is quite rich and heavy with social commentary. Apparently in Dostoevsky's The Idiot, there's a lot of commentary about this naive person's views on St. Petersburg, and the book kind of plays with that and kind of shows the clash between his feeling about it, what it's actually like. And I imagine there's a lot of stuff to do with social class and stuff like that in there. I think this is possibly with Mifune's character a remnant of that hasn't really been properly translated, is that whenever he turns up in the film at the beginning for the first half, he's always got this like gaggle of like weirdo characters that just follow him around. And like one of the entertaining things in the film was just talking to Jen, my wife, we were watching it, pointing at these weirdos in the background and saying, look at that guy in the big sunglasses, what's he all about? Look at that woman chewing gum really crazy, like look at that guy with the massive hair. Like they just had he's just got this rogues gallery of weirdos. None of them really comes into it. You don't know why he's got them, but they follow him around.
Because there's all this stuff about a dowry and whether or not it's 600,000 yen or 1,000,000 yen, and there's this 1,000,000 yen and it comes in, it's thrown on the fire. And I don't know if the idea is that that's all of his money and then he's broke for the rest of the film, or I couldn't quite follow it if I'm honest. But that he comes in as this big shot rich fellow who can buy everybody over and over again. Whether or not that's bluster and bravado, I'm not sure. And then he's just kind of in this dilapidated house for the rest of it.
Yeah, I think the idea, he's kind of crowdfunded that money, because all the group are kind of like, it took ages to get that together, like they've all chipped in. And I think what's supposed to have happened, because it wasn't super clear to me either, is that Setsuko Hara's character has been basically a child prostitute for a wealthy, horrible bloke who she's been living with. And because he feels bad about having made her his child prostitute, he is going to give 600,000 yen as a kind of dowry to marry her off to the chap who I forget the name of the character and the actor. The actor's in loads of Kurosawa movies. He was everything from Quiet Jewel onwards. He's basically in, but basically,
is it Kiyama? He's kind of he somehow manages. I think just because he's got less screen time, he sometimes manages to be even blander than Kamada.
That's interesting because I really like that actor, because you'll see when you see him in Seven Samurai, he sort of plays the kind of cheeky, affable, amiable samurai that's kind of all jokes. So when I see his face, I'm just like, oh, I love that guy. But anyway, that guy, he's going to get this dowry from the bloke in order to marry Setsuko Hara. And Mifune, because he doesn't want Setsuko Hara to marry this bloke, is going to give him 1,000,000 to not marry her. So he's going to go, what would you rather have, her for 600 or 1,000,000 and you leave her alone? I think that's what's going on. But you're completely right. It isn't very well communicated in the film. And it's one of those things where you wonder whether it's just incoherent or whether there was a lot more explanation in the longer version. I would guess the latter. I would guess it's much clearer in Kurosawa's original version.
I mean, that is one of the main problems, is that some points are sort of belabored over and over and over again, and other times there'll be little bits of narrative information that are key but only mentioned a couple of times, and you jump. And it's not like it's it doesn't feel like it's carefully constructed narrative to lead you down a path. It just feels a little slapdash and a little bit it feels hatcheted.
I think obviously we've got to look at the film that exists, but I think Kurosawa deserves a little bit of benefit of the doubt for the fact that at the very least estimates 2 hours of this film is missing. And so these things that don't make sense, I mean, it's fair obviously to say the film is boring and bad and these things don't make sense, but also to bear in mind that Kurosawa's original version probably did make sense. I mean, there was a time during the film actually where my wife said that she reckoned the longer version would probably make more sense, and I said, look, I don't want to take that chance. but it's I think it's still fair to point out one thing I want to say, because you mentioned that the first time the film had a bit of life for you was when Setsuko Hara is at that party. I actually think the best Setsuko Hara scene is when she's introduced and the sister of the guy she's going to marry, who is another Kurosawa actress who's been in basically all of the last 5 or 6 films we've seen. The sister and her have this stare off, and they're just giving each other stink eye and intense close up. That's my favorite scene in the film. She comes in that beret. She's such a character. There's that extremely great, Jen and I are laughing because there's that bit where she smashes a vase, and instead of just pushing it over, she like whips her cape really dramatically at it. It's just it felt kind of anime. It was insanely like over the top and kind of bravura. Like her performance, maybe it doesn't belong in this film, but I would like to see a film about her character more than I want to see a film about anything else.
I don't know. You got to try and match things up. I mean, her performance and Bifuni performance are the only two performances that seem to be in the same film or it belong in the same film. Like the other scene that is memorable. The other scene is memorable is the scene towards the end where there's all this business with letters and who Kameda wants to marry and who he's really in love with, and the two women sort of arguing over him, and Hara's character kind of makes him choose, like, you know, in front of his fiance, like, you don't want to be with her, you want to be with me. And there's this kind of standoff scene, and it gets really histrionic, and it to the point where it's like it's ridiculous, and then it goes from the ridiculous to the sublime almost, because because it is just so I don't know,
melodramatic and
heightened, but just fun for a second, which is something that can't be said about much of the other film.
Yeah.
I mean, also stylistically, there isn't much going for it. There's a great scene when they're out in the snow and there's some sort of event going on, and there's people on ice skates with masks, and that looks really great.
I disagree. I disagree about the stylistic thing, because one of the things that, and it's the same in very talky films like Scandal early on, is he always manages to at least organize the frame in an interesting way. And so even though this film's very talky and quite boring, usually the people are arranged in the frame in an interesting way. Usually he'll shoot something through a doorway and there'll be one person in the foreground and one person in the hall, one person on the stairs, and they're all in shot. Or there's that really beautiful shot late on in the movie where Mifune is like watching from behind glass as the two characters walk up the stairs towards the camera, and he's kind of looking over them. And there's a few. I think there's a lot of nice visual flourishes and some interesting shots.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more than I noticed. It's just when it's so difficult to kind of really keep track of the plot and the character motivations, then a lot of the intent of the blocking and the framing gets lost.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with you there.
Yeah.
One of the things that Alex Cox covers in his introduction that Donald Ritchie sort of expands upon in his book is that Kurosawa was very, very keen to make a 100% faithful adaptation to The Idiot. And it's a book that he held in such high regard. It was his favorite novel by his favorite novelist, that he didn't really want to change anything about it, which is why he made such a long film, because his intention was just to film literally everything from the book. And not only is that a terrible idea for how to adapt a book to film, but one of the things Ritchie points out is that he kind of loses a lot of the context, and he kind of gets all the events in place but doesn't actually sort of capture any of their spirit. In fact, one of the quotes I have from the Ritchie book is, the novel is more than its story, and the film, by insisting upon fidelity, remains only story. And even without having read the novel, I can sort of see that criticism. It does feel like, because one of the things, even if you haven't read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and all that, is that they are these great kind of tracts about politics at the time and morality and social commentary and all these kind of things, and you don't really get that from this. It does feel just like a sequence of quite boring events rather than a sweeping idea of a moral problem or a philosophy or anything.
Well, that's the thing, is like, if Kurosawa is kind of known for his humanity and his kind of sympathetic eye towards his characters, I mean, The Idiot, Kameda's not a believable character. He might be, maybe it could be differently interpreted from the page, but Mori doesn't do that. He kind of does this
just a pained expression the whole time. He's just kind of spending the whole film going, "Oh, God."
It's basically Forrest Gump. Like
it is. There are scenes in it where I thought that exactly.
And you go, and this isn't a real character. And because the point of it is that all these people kind of use, I don't know, that it comes across that every single character kind of either mistreats him or kind of realizes how shit they are when they spend time with him and then feel better about themselves because they're around him. There isn't really anybody to root for in the film. So it's
there's
just...
I will say I completely agree with that. I will say there's a couple of bits where he does inject himself into the movie and does move away from, I think, just trying to do what's on the page, and it pays off and it's a much better film. And one of those examples, it's very small, but one of those examples is the guy who's basically Setsuko has been a concubine for. He goes to get himself a drink at a bar. So he's about to pour himself a drink. Takashi Shimura comes over. Love Takashi Shimura. He takes the glass off the bottle off the bloke, pours himself a drink. And then when the guy goes to get the bottle again, he tries to pour, I think, tries to pour somebody else a drink. And then he just tips the drink on the bar. And there's this kind of lovely little like silent comedy bit of business about this bottle where this guy can't get a drink and the bottle's just moving between hands. And it doesn't support anything in the narrative. It doesn't say anything about the characters. It doesn't inform or motivate anything in the scene or the plot. But it's this lovely little bit of like silent comedy business that gets choreographed in there. And I imagine is not on the page of the book. There's also a scene that Cox and Richie both draw attention to that otherwise I think would have passed me by because it's very slight, but it's apparently an invention of Kurosawa's, which is where Mifune takes the idiot to see his mum, and his mum serves them cake. She doesn't have any cakes. So she takes them off this like altar where they're like cakes that are intended for the gods. And I think if I hadn't heard Alex Cox say that before I watched the film, I wouldn't necessarily have put two and two together there. But the idea is that she's got these little things on an altar and she's so poor that she just cuts little bits of cake off to give to a guest from the god's altar. And they're eating these like god cakes in this scene. But that's a lovely little scene that apparently isn't in the book and has kind of a bit of warmth and humanity to it. And it seems that if he had tried to adapt it less directly and just sort of in his own way, would have been a bit more successful.
Yeah, quite possibly. I like that. I do remember that. So it was really, I was finding myself forgetting this film as it was going along, to be honest. And reminding me of that scene. It was nice. I don't know who the actress was who plays the mother, but he's kind of Mifune's kind of sitting there going, "Oh, she doesn't know what's going on. She barely knows who I am," like that kind of thing. But it reminded me as I was watching. Now you're saying that it's a bit like it reminded me of Martin Scorsese's mum's performances in her films a little bit. I know it's not Akira Kurosawa's mother, but that kind of slightly doe-eyed, looking around, almost looking into the camera performance that Martin Scorsese's mother always put through, and I thought that was quite nice. That did make me smile.
Yeah, there's kind of moments of life that sneak through, kind of in spite of the film, which is very leaden and very dead for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, for the most part, this was kind of a make your own fun for me. Like, there's a great bit towards the end. I think I don't know if I can't remember if it's in the scene where. I can't remember if it's the scene where Takeo kind of tries to make him choose, or if it's the scene directly after. But there's just Mifune, the way he's dressed in his costume, he looked like Elvis in his fat period, and that made me chuckle. That Mifune as a fat Elvis was
one of the things. Is that when he's in his shiny like silk robe? And he's got kind of pompadour hair almost.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's something I want to bring up about this film that's I actually think is quite intelligent about it, and it's kind of interesting, which is that basically in order to adapt it to be this Russian work, he sets the film in not only the coldest part of Japan, Hokkaido in the north, where it's always snowing, but Hokkaido is also the most western part of Japan, in terms of its cultural influences, and it takes a lot of cultural influence from Russia as a place. So it's, for example, a part of Japan where chairs and tables are more common than tatami mats. So he takes the film to that location. I guess it's pointless. I guess he could adapt it in a more Japanese way and not do that. But I think in his efforts to be very literal with the translation, he moves it to a part of Japan that is culturally the most similar to Russia. Which is just kind of an interesting thing about it, and an interesting thing about why it's set in Hokkaido. But
my understanding is that, and like I said, I've never read the book. I did do a little bit of reading, but I thought the book was set somewhere like St. Petersburg, somewhere quite busy, like metropolitan, which
is lost. Which is lost here. Like that's one of the things I think, like,
because it does feel very parochial, doesn't it? It feels very kind of small. This is a small community where everybody knows each other. And that does seem like that
he would have
certainly something that sounds like it might be lost in translation for the sake of
he would have probably been better off setting it in like contemporary Tokyo and trying to carry off the actual social critique and the intent of the book, rather than trying to slavishly reproduce the book on screen as faithfully as possible. And I think that is the main problem with this film. But yeah, I mean, that's, to be honest, there's not a lot more I have to say about this one.
I really struggled. It was quite. I like being epileptic myself. I kind of like the idea that this is all brought on by epilepsy. His
idiocy.
His idiocy and his unfiltered honesty. So I might start just dropping some truth bombs on people and saying it's not my fault, I'm epileptic. And that it's just a bit stagey, a little bit talky, a bit boring, and a bit convoluted. Even, and the fact that I guess that it's been hacked apart doesn't help any of that. I did break my break some of my rules and do a little bit of reading around this. And that was a common thing. Even the people, because there seems to be some reassessment of it over the last few years, in places like Little White Lies and on other people's blogs and stuff. And in some of the stuff that I was reading, they were saying, even the positive reassessment was saying it takes a couple of watches to sort of work out the finer details of the plot points and things like that.
Yeah, again, I'm not going to take that risk.
No, it doesn't
inspire those watches.
No, it doesn't feel like I'm going to, this is the shortest one we're going to do by the looks of things. But it doesn't feel like you would get a reward from repeat watching. I've seen films before where I haven't, we've all seen films before where we know there's something in there. It's taken you feel like you haven't got everything out of a film, and you've not quite understood it. But you know that if you were to revisit it and go back in and put the time and the effort in, the rewards would come. And I can't see anything that I would get rewarded for repeat watching out of this.
I agree with you. I'm scanning through my notes trying to find some life in them. And there's one thing, just because it's sort of funny, was I wrote the note, takes a turn after tea, because after that scene with the cakes, there's a kind of a mad running through the snow, isn't there, and an attempted murder that seems to come as a kind of about face. Like it's so extreme the way some of it's staged that it doesn't ring true. And I think the bits of the film that work the best are the ones you can actually kind of relate to in some way. And I think the character is such an alien, and the way everyone reacts to him is so over the top that it kind of there's not really any hooks to kind of get invested a lot of the time, I think.
No, it's just moments. It's just like you kind of it will just come alive very briefly for a minute or two and then go off. Like there's the scene where Kamada and Akama sort of have a bit of time together after their rivalry over Takeo, and he's sort of saying, I should hate you, but I really like hanging out with you, you know, and that's quite interesting that it's not a rivalry that's kind of a complete, blood feud. Let's go straight into I'm gonna beat you up, or that's the fact that they have a friendship despite their kind of love rivalry is quite interesting. But it's so raw, it's so overly
also,
kind of stated, because that's the other thing. Because I mean, Louis Theroux's not a bad kind of it's not really a bad analogy, because he just asks these questions and kind of doesn't really offer much in the way of wisdom himself. He forces the characters to sort of like spill their guts, really, and kind of talk over and over again, but and just kind of explain themselves in a very kind of open and honest way. But it's, I don't know, it just goes on and on.
I agree with you about this idea of their friendship being interesting, and possibly in the book, I would bet my life in the book that is interesting. I think what makes it not interesting here is the fact that while you can completely understand why you would want to hang out with Toshiro Mifune, even when he's playing a bastard, you can't understand why Toshiro Mifune wants to hang out with this other bloke. Like he's such a dead piece of wood. And so the relationship, all the charisma is on one side of that relationship.
Well, to be fair, he's not an entirely dead piece of wood in this, because he's bad. So it's not like he's super bland and you just kind of wash over it. You kind of look at him going, "What are you doing? Like this is a bad performance."
Yeah, I agree.
It's the sort of performance they would have made fun of in the fake trailers from Tropic Thunder.
I agree. Actually, it's interesting because in the Donald Ritchie book, he criticizes Mifune, criticizes Hari, criticizes a lot of the other supporting players, and he reserves all his praise for Mori. And he talks about how Mori is one of Japan's most intelligent actors. Now, maybe there are bits in other films where he's great, but I've seen, I think at this point, the top 2 rows of his filmography are letterboxed by popularity, and I've not been impressed. But anyway, I want to say one thing. Obviously, I don't have the autobiography anymore, because he stops that after Rashomon. But there are some quotes from Kurosawa that are attributed to him in Ritchie's book. So we won't run out of Partridge Kurosawa necessarily. But basically, there's a bit here. I don't know if this is just self-denial, but there's a bit here where he's quoted as saying, "People have said it was a failure. I don't think so. At least as entertainment, it's not a failure. Of all my films, people wrote to me the most about this one. If it had been as bad as all that, they wouldn't have written to me. I trust my audience. They understood what I was saying. It's a new kind of melodrama." No,
it's not just
Akira.
It's not just a river in Egypt, is it?
And I think as well, like, that idea that people write to him about this film all the time must just be a lie. Like, I can't imagine his inbox is full of people going, "Oh,
I'll tell you what else was quite interesting. There seemed to be a little bit of bile in this, going back quite a way in our podcast. There did seem to be a few jabs about people who would deliver letters for potential suitors, messengers who were delivering love letters to potential fiancés, which seemed to be a jab at his friend who
stitched him up on the old one. I can't remember which episode that was on, but that's true. I thought about that actually during the film, that there was there seemed to be some of that bitterness in there. Also the idea that but also the main character kind of is like his friend, because the main character's there in front of someone he supposedly mates with, in terms of the cheeky Seven Samurai guy, and Setsuko Hara's like, "Should I marry your mate?" And then he's like, "No, you shouldn't." I'm just like, well, that's a bit harsh. He's standing right there, mate. But yeah, it's not a classic. It's not one of the best ones. One thing I will say after this, just because it's slightly interesting, is that this film, because it did so badly in Japan, wasn't released in the West, as far as I can tell, till the early 60s, where it was then also quite badly received. But it's interesting because these days we sort of expect that everything that comes out gradually, but over a year everywhere, and this film just didn't exist in the Western consciousness till the 60s. And then another thing to point out is that while we've been kind of following the films in the chronological order in which they were made, it's actually after The Idiot and before the next film, Ikiru, that Tiger's Tail was released.
Yes,
because Tiger's Tail was banned during the war. It got censored and it got banned and it wasn't shown. So even though in, what was it, 45, I think. This is the point in the kind of release schedule canon where that one kind of came out, which is, considering that one was another one you in particular really struggled with. That's the 1-2 punch of Kurosawa that was happening in between Rashomon and Ikiru.
Yeah, he's lucky it took a while for Rashomon to catch on and get its critical dues, because I don't know.
Don't know if you would have stuck with him on that one. So I was going to say interesting. It isn't. That's reflexive. I was going to say, well, that's interesting. It's an interesting film. It isn't.
It's barely a curio, is it?
It's barely a curio. I will never watch it again. I've now seen it twice. I didn't remember. See, the thing is, I saw this years ago when I first got into Kurosawa, probably 10, 15 years ago, and I remembered nothing from it. Zero. So I was basically watching it fresh, and I'm sure I will forget about it just as much in time. But hopefully you've enjoyed hearing us talk about it. Maybe it saved you watching it. I would suggest this one is only for completists. You know, there are some filmmakers where there's some of the work's only for completists, and this is one of those.
Maybe there's some selected scenes on YouTube. I don't know, but
I think that you're probably like, because I do think there are some really nice shots in it. I disagree that that it doesn't look great in places, and I think that you could probably find some nice screenshots that would do a better job of it than watching it. So The Idiot, I'm guessing. Can I put it where I guess it's going?
Yeah, sure.
I think it's going more there. I think it's going worse than, because The Men Who John the Tiger's Tail is short. And I think that's going to give it more currency for you than this.
It does. Yeah, it really does. And there is a sustained 20 minutes that's interesting in the middle of it. I would push it over a little bit on the appreciation side, ever so slightly. But in terms of enjoyment, there is very little to enjoy.
Okay. This is for the eventual podcast audience. This is a scale of appreciation against enjoyment, where The Idiot is not quite going in the bottom corner.
Yeah, I push it over no, it is by far the one I've enjoyed the least out of what we've seen so far.
I would agree. I put it. I'm doing my own boxed. I'm doing a list as we go, where I'm putting them in an order of kind of how much I've enjoyed them, and I put this a couple off the bottom because I think Sanshiro Sagata 2 is a worse made film technically, so I kind of it got some points on that, but yeah, it's not enjoyable. But we have some great ones coming up. I mean, Ikiru and Seven Samurai, those are two of his very best.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously this is the stuff. I mean, Ikiru is actually one of the reasons I suggested this podcast, was because I don't know if I'm sure I texted you about this at the time, but there will be a remake of Ikiru coming out in the next couple of years, set in post-war London, starring Bill Nighy, and written by the writer of I think it's called Never Let Me Go. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. Okay, interesting.
So that was, and I was thinking to myself, like, I need to watch an actual Akira Kurosawa film before I watch the remake of Ikiru. So that's where one of the ideas for this podcast came from. So I'm looking forward to Ikiru. I know that you speak very highly of it. I remember you doing a podcast years ago with John Baranachea at the cinema we both used to work at, where you were doing like a Pantheon series and choosing directors, and Ikiru came up. I'm looking forward to that quite a lot. I don't know much about it, apart from he likes to sit on the swings.
So that's what we normally do at the end, is you sort of talk about what you know about it now and what your sort of prediction for it is. So let's do that then. What's your thoughts on this so far?
I know it's about a bureaucrat who gets a terminal diagnosis, and the main image is a smiley Takashi Shimura sitting on a swing. So it's probably some sort of life-affirming film. Sounds like the sort of thing. I know you just said Bill Nighy is going to be in it. It sounds like the sort of thing Toby Jones would be in.
Toby Jones is a great shout for the Takashi Shimura of Hollywood, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think so, because the thing is as well is like with Shimura being the star in Ikiru, but then being like fifth banana in another Kurosawa film. Toby Jones has that kind of range as well,
I
where he'll
suppose,
star
yeah.
in a movie, but then he'll also be a guy that turns up for 2 seconds, and he plays a wide range of roles.
Yeah, and and I guess Shimura's also he's in and out all of the Godzilla films as well, isn't he? As a scientist,
He's in, he's in the first one. I don't know if he's in any of the others, but yeah, he's
I
in the
think he's in
first
a few
Godzilla.
more. Because I
Okay.
was looking at his filmography. I'm pretty sure he's in Destroy All Monsters and Mothra and a couple
Okay.
of others. Might be wrong, but I did look. I did see.
Yeah, I
that
guess
it's
that is
based
the
on
equivalent. Yeah, that is the equivalent of like Toby Jones turning up in like Captain America, isn't it? I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, so I kind of see it as the sort of thing that he'd be in. It also sounds to me like the plot of a Blur song from The Great Escape or Part Life, something like Mr. Robinson's Quango or Tracy Jacks or Best Days. That kind of when they were sort of in their mid-20s but writing songs about middle-age ennui. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be good. And then we're up on a hopefully we're up on a kind of on a tangent.
Steady up trajectory. Yeah. I don't know if you can, without prejudicing it. I think it depends. If you end up, as a lot of people do, thinking Seven Samurai is the kind of high watermark, then inevitably it's going to be a downward. I think there's peaks and troughs, and I personally, my favorite's high and low. So the best is still yet to come. But yeah, we're certainly in his purple patch now. We're certainly in his imperial phase.
Okay. Excellent. Well, that's what I'm expecting from Ikiru anyway, and I've already forgotten. I just had to check to see what we've been talking about.
Yeah, but that was brought on by your epilepsy.
The idiot is going in the rearview mirror quite swiftly, and let's concentrate on Ikiru next, I think.
Wonderful. Yeah. So we'll probably we've been doing these sort of every weekend. We actually didn't do one last weekend because the undertaking of watching The Idiot was something we both, I think, took us a while to actually get around to. But Ikiru is a delight, and I don't think it's that long. I would be surprised if it's over 2 hours. Probably under 2 hours.
2 hours 20.
Okay, well that shows what I know, but it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that way. So yeah, let's reconvene then when we see that one, and that will be maybe next weekend.
Keep you posted. Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah, thank you very much for watching or listening, and yeah, we'll see you next time for Ikiru. Take care.